They saw a 30-year-old librarian in a Marine's uniform and called her a liability. But they didn't know about the decade of brutal training hidden behind her quiet eyes, or the storm she was about to unleash on them. The air at Paris Island was a physical entity, a suffocating blanket of humidity woven with the smells of salt marsh, pine needles, and collective anxiety. When Dr. Aris Thorne stepped off the bus, the oppressive atmosphere felt less like a change in climate and more like a change in gravity. At 30 years old, with a PhD in ancient military history and the pale, indoor complexion of a lifelong academic, she was an anomaly. Her fellow recruits, mostly teenagers or men barely in their 20s, stared at her with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Their gazes snagged on the fine lines around her calm, gray eyes and the quiet, deliberate way she moved, a stark contrast to their jittery, testosterone-fueled energy. She shouldered her duffel bag, its weight familiar and grounding, and scanned the sprawling, oppressive geometry of concrete barracks and manicured drill fields. This was a world away from the hushed libraries and dusty archives of the university she'd left behind. The decision to enlist, made in the quiet aftermath of a personal tragedy she never spoke of, was a promise to her father, a former Delta Force operator. He had taught her that the mind was the primary weapon, but the body had to be its perfectly honed vessel. The first challenge didn't come from a drill instructor, but from a walking cliché of military arrogance. His name was Gunnar Rhodes, a golden-haired, blue-eyed former college quarterback from Georgia whose confidence was as loud as his voice. He moved with the entitled swagger of a man who had never been told no, trailed by a loyal pack of 5. "Well now, what do we have here?" Rhodes boomed, his voice dripping with condescending charm as he and his crew encircled Aris. "Looks like the professor got lost on her way to the faculty lounge." His followers snickered on cue. There was Wrecking Ball Rizzo, a mountain of muscle from Chicago whose neck was a testament to a lifetime of lifting heavy things and getting into fights. Cody Brand, a former state wrestling champ, bounced on the balls of his feet, his eyes already sizing up takedown angles. Silas Vance was pale and wiry, with the cold, watchful eyes of a scavenger. Leo Finch, quiet and shifty, seemed to catalog her gear with a thief's appraisal. And then there was Nash, the smallest of the group, but the one with the sharpest tongue, the instigator. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am?" Nash chirped, a malicious glint in his eye. "I think the book club meets on the other side of base." Aris set her bag down slowly. She met Rhodes's gaze, her expression unreadable. She'd faced down tenured professors during her dissertation defense. This was child's play. "I'm quite sure, thank you," she replied, her voice even and calm, carrying a quiet authority that momentarily threw them off. The principles of asymmetric warfare, often employed by smaller, seemingly weaker forces to overcome a numerically or physically superior enemy, have been documented since Thucydides's account of the Peloponnesian War. It's a fascinating subject. You should read it sometime. If you can read. Silence. The pack looked to their alpha, confused. Rhodes's charming smile tightened at the edges. He wasn't used to being intellectually outmaneuvered. He expected fear, or anger, or defensive posturing. He didn't expect a history lesson. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. "This ain't a classroom, Professor. Out here, big words won't save you. Strength does." "I agree," Aris said, not flinching. "But you and I might have different definitions of strength." She picked up her bag and walked past him, deliberately breaking their circle. The moment was a small victory, but she knew it was only the opening skirmish. She had not made friends. She had established herself as the other, the outsider. And in a place like Paris Island, which thrived on breaking down individuality to forge a collective identity, being the other was the most dangerous thing you could be. She had just painted a target on her own back, but as her father always said, it's better to choose the target yourself than to let the enemy choose it for you. The harassment began as a low-grade infection before metastasizing into a systemic assault. It was a campaign orchestrated with a surprising degree of strategy, clearly influenced by Nash's petty cunning and Rhodes's need to reassert his dominance. This wasn't just random bullying, it was a calculated effort to break her, piece by piece. During rifle maintenance, after Aris had meticulously cleaned and oiled her M16, Finch would perform a buddy check with greasy hands, leaving a slick, disqualifying film over the bolt carrier group that earned her a screaming reprimand from the drill instructor, Sergeant Kincaid. Kincaid was a leathery veteran carved from the old school of Marine Corps philosophy. He believed that trial by fire forged the strongest warriors and that any recruit who couldn't handle the internal politics of the platoon didn't deserve to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor. He saw the targeted harassment of Aris not as a problem to be solved, but as a natural part of the culling process. If she was weak, she would break. If she was strong, she would endure. His indifference was a green light for Rhodes and his crew. The psychological warfare was relentless. They nicknamed her Dr. Doolittle because she was often seen observing the base's wildlife with a scholar's focus, a habit she used to maintain a semblance of inner peace. Nash would make cooing bird sounds whenever she walked by. During chow, Rizzo would accidentally stumble into her, sending her tray of food clattering to the floor. As she knelt to clean up the mess amidst a chorus of snickers, Brand would make loud, crude remarks about her being in her natural position. The physical sabotage escalated. On a forced march through the humid swamps, Vance, the wiry scavenger, managed to snag her canteen, emptying half of it onto the muddy trail when he thought no one was looking. Aris, rationing her remaining water, felt the first real pangs of dehydration-induced dizziness but pushed through, her mind retreating into the disciplined fortress her father had helped her build. She never complained. She never retaliated. She simply endured, her face a mask of stoic neutrality. But behind the mask, the historian was at work. She was gathering data, analyzing patterns, and building profiles. She was doing what she did best, research. She noted how Rhodes's arrogance made him predictable. He always led with his right hand in drills. She saw that Rizzo, for all his bulk, had a slight limp when he was exhausted, favoring his left knee. Brand, the wrestler, was lost without a low center of gravity and became clumsy when forced to fight upright. Vance was fast but lacked stamina. Finch was an opportunist who folded instantly under direct confrontation. And Nash, the brains of the operation, had a glass jaw for ego. A single, well-placed verbal barb could send him into a sputtering rage. One evening, while she was cleaning the mud from her gear for the third time that day, thanks to a friendly shove from Rizzo during the obstacle course, she felt a presence beside her. It was another recruit, a quiet farm boy from Iowa named Peterson. "They shouldn't be doing that to you," he mumbled, not looking at her. "It ain't right." Aris paused, her hands still. "Everyone's fighting their own war, Peterson. This is just part of mine." "But it's 6 against 1, he insisted, his voice low. Aris looked at her reflection in a small puddle of murky water. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair plastered to her forehead, but her eyes were clear and focused. "The odds at Thermopylae were far worse," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "It's not about the numbers. It's about the terrain, the strategy, and knowing exactly when to make your stand." Peterson just stared at her, confused. He didn't understand the historical reference, but he understood the chilling certainty in her voice. He was looking at a woman who wasn't just surviving, she was planning. The silent war was her chosen battlefield, and her enemies had no idea they were providing her with the very ammunition she would use to win. The after-hours tutoring was Rhodes's masterstroke of cruelty, disguised as benevolent concern. He approached Sergeant Kincaid with a performance of practiced sincerity that would have earned applause in a theater. "Sergeant, a few of us are worried about Thorne," Rhodes began, his brow furrowed with fake concern. "She's smart, we all know that. But she's falling behind on the physical side. We think she's a liability, and we don't want her to get herself or someone else hurt. Maybe, if it's okay with you, we could give her some extra instruction after hours." Help her catch up. Kincaid, who saw Aris's deliberate, energy-conserving movements as hesitation and her smaller frame as an inherent weakness, readily agreed. Good initiative, Rhodes. Shows leadership. Just don't break her. The brass wants these women to succeed. He said it with a cynical smirk that told Rhodes all he needed to know. The sessions were approved and unsupervised. They became a nightly ritual of degradation in the empty, echoing expanse of the hand-to-hand combat facility, known as the pit. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the padded mats. For Aris, it was a laboratory of pain. The 6 of them would take turns, under the guise of demonstrating techniques. Brand would show her a proper takedown, driving her into the mat with unnecessary force, his knee digging into her ribs as he held her down. "You gotta be aggressive, Professor," he'd grunt in her ear. No hesitation. Rizzo would demonstrate, breaking a hold, gripping her arm until her knuckles turned white, his thumbs pressing into nerve clusters. "See? You gotta know where to apply pressure," he'd say, ignoring her sharp intake of breath. Finch and Vance would work in tandem, showing her how to defend against multiple attackers by shoving her back and forth between them like a human pinball. Nash provided the running commentary, a stream of venomous insults about her age, her gender, and her supposed weakness. And then there was Rhodes. He saved himself for last, the grand finale. His instruction was always about dominance. He'd pin her, his superior weight and strength undeniable, his face close to hers. "This is the reality, Aris," he'd whisper, using her first name to feign intimacy, which only made it more violating. "Out there, the enemy won't care about your PhD. They'll see a woman, and they'll see an easy target. We're just trying to prepare you for that." Each session ended the same way, with Aris left bruised and aching on the mat, and Rhodes standing over her with his signature refrain, "Maybe you should think about a desk job. This world isn't for you." But they never saw what was happening behind her eyes. While they were focused on her body, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. She wasn't just enduring, she was dissecting. Brand always leads with his right shoulder when he shoots for a takedown. A telegraph. Rizzo's left knee buckles under twisting pressure. Old injury. Finch panics when his escape route is cut off. Claustrophobic. Vance has a weak core, a solid strike to the solar plexus will fold him. Nash has zero pain tolerance. He talks tough, but he can't take a hit. And Rhodes. Rhodes is all power, no finesse. He overcommits to every punch, leaving himself wide open for a counter. His entire strategy is based on the assumption that his opponent will be intimidated. He's never faced someone who wasn't. She filed away every detail, every pained grunt, every predictable movement, every flicker of fear or arrogance in their eyes. She was building a database of their weaknesses, cross-referencing them with the thousands of hours of training her father had drilled into her. She'd learned Krav Maga for efficiency, Jiu-Jitsu for leverage, and Muay Thai for devastating strikes. She knew they were building towards something, a final, public humiliation designed to shatter her spirit completely. They thought they were the predators, toying with their prey. They had no idea she was the one in camouflage, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The pain was temporary. The data was permanent. And she was almost done with her research. Week 4 brought the Crucible, a brutal 54-hour field event designed to be the culminating test of basic training. But before the main event, Sergeant Kincaid had a special surprise, the Crucible Stress Test, a series of full-contact combat scenarios in the pit. The air was thick with nervous tension, a tangible cloud of adrenaline and fear. "Today, we separate the sheep from the goats," Kincaid barked, his voice bouncing off the cinderblock walls. He paced before the assembled recruits like a caged panther. "We find out who has the warrior spirit and who's been hiding in the back. You will be pushed, you will be tested, and some of you will learn a hard truth: you don't belong here." Across the mat, Aris saw Rhodes catch her eye. He smiled, not a friendly grin, but the predatory smirk of a chess player who has just maneuvered his opponent into checkmate. He had been working on Kincaid for days, planting seeds of doubt about Aris's readiness, framing his concern as a matter of platoon safety. "Sergeant Kincaid." Rhodes called out, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "With all due respect, I'm concerned about Thorne's ability to handle this level of intensity. Before we begin, perhaps my team and I could provide a demonstration. For her benefit. Show her what a real, high-pressure combat situation feels like so she's prepared." Kincaid stopped pacing and stroked his chin, his eyes narrowing on Aris. She could see the internal conflict, the political pressure to graduate female recruits versus his deep-seated belief that coddling was a death sentence in the field. "You think she needs a live-fire demonstration, Rhodes?" Kincaid asked, though the question was rhetorical. "Just want to make sure she's ready for the realities of combat, Sergeant," Rhodes replied, his tone perfectly modulated between professional concern and genuine care. The performance was flawless. "Fine," Kincaid declared, a glint of cruel curiosity in his eyes. "Rhodes, Rizzo, Brand, Vance, Finch, Nash. You six will demonstrate proper multi-aggressor engagement techniques. Your target is Thorne. Show her what she'll face in the real world." A collective gasp went through the platoon. This wasn't a drill, it was a public execution. The other recruits shuffled back, their boots scuffing on the floor, forming a wide, silent circle. It was a coliseum, and she was the spectacle. Whispers rippled through the crowd, bets being placed on how many seconds she would last. Rhodes and his 5 disciples stepped into the center of the mat. They spread out, a loose semicircle that methodically cut off any path of retreat. Aris's heart hammered against her ribs, a steady, powerful beat. The trap had been sprung. "Don't worry, Professor," Rhodes said, cracking his knuckles theatrically. "We'll start slow. This is for your own good." Rizzo flexed, his massive biceps straining the seams of his uniform. Brand dropped into a low wrestler's crouch. Finch and Vance circled like hyenas, looking for an opening. Nash stood slightly behind Rhodes, a smug, directorial look on his face. "The thing about the enemy," Rhodes lectured, his voice projecting to the entire room, "is that they won't follow any rules. They won't care that you're a woman. They won't worry about breaking your spirit. They'll just break your body. So, consider this your final lesson." The first shove came from Rizzo. It was a blunt, powerful impact to her shoulder that sent her stumbling backward. She deliberately let her footing falter, her body absorbing the impact as she'd been taught, but her face registered the shock and fear they expected. She backed into Brand, who grabbed her arms from behind, pinning them. "See how easy that was?" Rhodes taunted, circling them. "In a real fight, you'd already be a casualty." Brand released her with a contemptuous push, sending her sprawling to the mat. She rolled, coming up in a defensive crouch, playing the part of the overwhelmed victim. Her lip was split, a minor cut from an errant elbow, and the coppery taste of her own blood filled her mouth. It was a familiar taste. It was a trigger. "Had enough yet?" Nash sneered from the sidelines. "No shame in quitting. The library is waiting." Aris wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. Her mind was a silent, crystalline space. 15 years of her father's voice, of dojo discipline, of pain and practice, all coalesced into a single point of perfect, cold clarity. "One more time," Rhodes announced to the crowd, his confidence at its zenith. "Let's show her what happens when you're truly helpless. Hold her steady." As Brand and Rizzo moved in to restrain her, and the others closed the circle for the final humiliation, Aris made a decision. The research phase was over. She stopped playing the victim. The shift was so subtle, so profound, that no one noticed it at first. The fear in Aris's eyes didn't just vanish, it was replaced by an unnerving, predatory calm. Her posture changed, her center of gravity lowering. Her breathing, once feigned as panicked, became slow, deep, and rhythmic. The victim was gone. The historian had stepped aside. The warrior her father had forged was now in control. "Time to learn your place," Rhodes snarled, stepping forward to deliver the final blow. As his fist began its journey, Aris smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the cold, calculating expression of a mathematician who has just solved a complex equation. In that microsecond, Rhodes saw the smile and his blood ran cold. He had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The storm broke. Vance was first. As he lunged to grab her left arm, Aris moved with a liquid economy of motion that defied his expectations. She didn't retreat, she flowed toward him. Her right hand shot out, not in a punch, but with fingers extended, striking the precise nerve cluster on the inside of his wrist. His hand went numb instantly, his grip failing. Simultaneously, she pivoted, hooking her leg behind his and applying a sharp, controlled pressure. It wasn't a kick, it was a lever. Vance, the scavenger, tumbled to the mat, his own momentum used against him, landing with a surprised grunt. One down. Rizzo, the wrecking ball, charged from her right, bellowing with rage. He was counting on his size to overwhelm her. Aris met his charge not with force, but with physics. As he reached for her, she dropped low, her shoulder driving into his midsection. But the target wasn't his center mass, it was his left knee, the one she'd seen him favor. Her shoulder impacted the joint at a perfect angle. There was no audible snap, but a wave of pure agony shot through Rizzo's leg. His charge collapsed into a pained, stumbling heap. He went down clutching his knee, his bellow of rage turning into a howl of pain. 2 down. Brand, the wrestler, saw his opening. With Aris focused on Rizzo, he shot in low, a textbook double-leg takedown. It was the only move he truly knew, and Aris was counting on it. As he committed, she didn't try to stop him. Instead, she sprawled backward, wrapping her left arm around his thick neck in a guillotine choke. Brand's momentum carried them both to the mat, but he had driven his own head directly into the trap. Aris locked her legs around his torso, squeezing with the crushing power of practiced technique. Brand struggled for a few seconds, his face turning a deep shade of crimson, before frantically tapping his hand on the mat, the universal sign of submission. 3 down. The entire sequence had taken less than 10 seconds. The crowd was frozen in disbelief. Finch and Nash, seeing their 3 largest teammates neutralized, hesitated for a split second. It was all Aris needed. She sprang to her feet as they decided to attack together, a pincer movement. Finch came from the right, Nash from the left. Aris took 2 quick steps backward, drawing them in. Just as they were about to grab her, she dropped and executed a perfect, spinning sweep kick. Her leg moved like a scythe. It didn't aim to injure, but to disrupt. The kick swept both Finch's and Nash's feet out from under them. They lost their balance and, with a comical lack of grace, crashed into each other, collapsing into a tangled, groaning pile of limbs. 4 and 5 down. Now, only Rhodes remained. He stood in the center of the mat, his face a mask of pure shock. The world had ceased to make sense. He looked at the carnage around him, Vance clutching his arm, Rizzo writhing in pain, Brand gasping for air, and his 2 cleverest lieutenants looking like fools. He shook his head, denial warring with the impossible reality before him. With a roar of pure, undiluted fury, he charged, throwing a wild, powerful haymaker. It was the punch of a brawler, full of anger and brute force. Aris watched it come as if in slow motion. She had seen this punch 100 times in her mind. She swayed effortlessly to the left, the punch sailing past her ear. Using his overcommitted momentum, she stepped in close, inside his guard. Her left hand cupped the back of his head. Her right forearm slid under his chin, pressing against his carotid artery. She locked her hands together, dropped her weight, and arched her back. A standing rear naked choke. It was textbook. It was flawless. Rhodes's air supply was cut off instantly. He clawed at her arm, but her grip was like steel. His powerful legs kicked, but he had no leverage. He was helpless. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a desperate, primal panic. After 3 seconds that felt like an eternity, Aris felt his body go limp. She held the choke for another half-second to ensure he was no longer a threat, then released him. Gunnar Rhodes, the alpha, the quarterback, the king of the platoon, crumpled to the mat like an empty sack. 6 down. The entire engagement had lasted 28 seconds. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the pit, broken only by the pained gasps of the fallen and the distant hum of the ventilation system. The 50 recruits forming the circle stood frozen, their faces a mixture of awe, terror, and utter confusion. They had come expecting a slaughter, they had witnessed a sermon delivered in the language of controlled violence. Sergeant Kincaid stood with his mouth agape, his weathered face cycling through shock, disbelief, and a dawning, grudging respect. In 30 years of service, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, he had never seen anything like it. Aris stood in the center of the mat, the calm eye of the hurricane she had created. She wasn't even breathing hard. Her uniform was barely wrinkled. A single drop of blood from her split lip dripped onto the pristine mat, a tiny red exclamation point on the statement she had just made. She wiped her lip with the back of her hand, the same gesture as before, but now it was an act of punctuation, not vulnerability. She slowly scanned the circle of stunned faces, her gray eyes meeting each recruit's gaze until they looked away. "Does anyone else," she asked, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent facility, "require a demonstration?" No one answered. No one moved. The power structure of Delta Company had just been rewritten. The security footage, pulled by a stunned operator in the surveillance office, went viral within the Paris Island command structure before Aris had even finished her mandatory medical checkup, which consisted of a single adhesive bandage for her lip. The video landed on the desk of General Carlson, the base commander, a sharp, pragmatic woman who valued data and results over tradition. She watched the 28-second clip not once, but 5 times, her expression shifting from curiosity to amazement. She wasn't watching a brawl, she was watching a masterclass in tactical application. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mess hall was different. When Aris walked in, the usual chatter died. As she sat alone, Rhodes, moving like a man twice his age, a spectacular bruise blooming on his cheek, approached her table, flanked by the rest of his crew, all in various states of bandaged repair. He stopped a few feet away, his hands held open in a gesture of peace. "Thorne," he said, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. It was quiet, subdued, and respectful. We owe you an apology. What we did wasn't training. It was ignorant. It was wrong. Yesterday, you showed us what real strength is." Aris looked up from her meal, studying his face. She saw no deception, only the raw, humbling clarity of a man who had been utterly and completely defeated. That afternoon, she was summoned to General Carlson's office. The general gestured for her to sit, her eyes fixed on the security footage playing on a large monitor. "My father was Delta Force," Aris said, preempting the question. "He started training me when I was a child. He said the world would judge me on my appearance, so I had to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. He also taught you about restraint," General Carlson observed, pointing to the screen where Aris was releasing the chokehold on Rhodes. "You could have broken his arm. You could have dislocated Rizzo's knee. You chose not to. Why?" "The goal wasn't to injure, General," Aris replied. "It was to educate." A slow smile spread across General Carlson's face. "Well, Dr. Thorne, your class is about to get a lot bigger. After you graduate at the top of your class, and I have no doubt you will, you're going to help me rewrite this base's hand-to-hand combat curriculum." 6 months later, Instructor Thorne stood before a new class of recruits in the pit. Beside her, serving as her assistant, was Corporal Gunnar Rhodes. On the screen behind her, the legendary 28-second video played on a loop. The first thing you will learn here, Aris began, her voice resonating with quiet authority, is that your assumptions are your biggest enemy. Strength is not about size. Power is not about volume. A warrior is defined by their discipline, their strategy, and their respect for the art of combat. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the sea of eager, nervous faces. My father taught me that true strength is not about dominance, but about control. Especially self-control. It's about knowing you can, but choosing when you should. That is the lesson I want you to learn. That is the lesson that will keep you alive. Her legend was already whispered in every corner of the base, a story of the quiet librarian who became a warrior. It was a story about how the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you least expect. And as she looked out at the new generation, she knew her father's legacy, and her own, was just beginning. What do you think is the most important quality of a true warrior? Discipline, strength, or something else? Let me know in the comments below. And if you were inspired by this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Always remember to be respectful in your discussions. Comment respect if you agree that it is earned, not given.